Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Eyes On Geopolitics. Today we have Andy Milburn, Mick Mulroy, Jack Murphy, and myself. A lot happening, as usual. Kick things off. First and foremost, do us a favor. There's a little bit of house cleaning. Like and subscribe if you're listening to us on audio. Give us 5 stars. Subscribe there too. That's important as well. And if you want ad-free episodes of both Eyes On and The Team House, you can go to patreon.com/theteamhouse. All these guys, if you want to find out what Jack's working on, what Mick's working on, what Andy's working on, the links are in the description as well. Anything and everything you need to find is in the link down in the description. Mick has a new podcast called The Pub and the Porch, Applied Stoicism. It comes out every Monday. Link is in the description there as well. Videos coming very soon. It's a great podcast. Check it out, please. Thank you. All right. Now, the shit show that is the world. Venezuela. We have a USS Gerald R. Ford steaming in, Andy's favorite weapon system, of course, the carrier. Around 14% of the Navy's assets are in the Caribbean, the most in decades. Continued strikes going on boats, drug traffickers. This time it wasn't just Venezuelan. They hit on the Pacific, and they also hit Colombian drug traffickers as well. That also kicked up a little bit of a firestorm between Colombia's president and President Trump. But right now, let's just focus on Venezuela. It looks more and more like we're ready to go for it, or at least we're pushing for a regime change. Where are you guys at? You guys can, paper, rock, scissors to see who goes first. Nick, you go first. I picked.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the facts before we get into the analysis. The drug issue. There's more drugs that are produced in Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, especially fentanyl. I think Mexico's like 90% of fentanyl production in Venezuela. I'm not saying that Venezuela doesn't produce a lot of drugs. I'm just laying it out there, right? You mentioned it. 14% of the naval assets are now in the Caribbean. That's not necessary to interdict drug boats. I think it's fair to say that is either an intimidation factor for getting Maduro to potentially flee themselves, maybe a Noriega type operation to go in and get him. Certainly not enough to occupy Venezuela. Not that there'd be any political will to do that. They have an amphibious group with a view. That's not enough. They could potentially seize a port city or something like that. The issues, of course, are: is this about regime change? Is this about stemming the flow of illegal narcotics to the United States is killing American people? Is it both? Some of the legal issues. If we start doing strikes internal to Venezuela, that's a sovereign country that seems to violate several international laws, including Article 2 of the UN charter that created the UN. The United States is going to say, at least if you're talking international law, Article 51, which is an inherent right of self-defense of a country, but it has to be to oppose an armed attack or an imminent threat, right? So the White House is going to say, yeah, that one, imminent threat. They bring drugs, people take drugs, people die. It's up to you guys, everybody, to determine whether that would lead to the definition of an imminent threat. A drug boat that's off the coast of Venezuela is about 1,300 miles from the United States. It would take about 20 refueling of those types of boats to get to the United States. And then, of course, with all this major military activity, including B-1 bombers flying around the outskirts of Venezuela, we have the president acknowledging, in a rare event, the president acknowledging that he's authorized covert action. So not just intelligence collection to support military operations, but he doesn't have to authorize. The CIA does that all the time. But actually to take some form of action, we don't know what it is because we don't know the finding. But that finding could be lethal. It could be influence. It could be whatever the president essentially wrote it to be. And that's all going on at the same time as this major military buildup. So I guess I'll stop there, but hopefully that kind of laid. Oh, and then the last two parts, internal to the United States, to use the military, then you have the War Powers Act, right? It's the War Powers Act, although no president has acknowledged its constitutionality, says that if the president uses the military, they have 60 days to do so before either Congress declares a war, or he has to withdraw. He has 30 days to do so. So we're gonna hit that clock here, and then hopefully, I don't know why it's taken this long, the Supreme Court's actually can decide whether that act is constitutional. Because Congress says, Article 1, we're the ones that declare war. The president is the commander in chief after we declare. But that's never been resolved. So I think that kind of lays out a lot of the issues.
Boys. Andy?
Yeah, I was waiting for Jack, the visiting star, to jump in, but Jack is very circumspect on these things and waits for us to talk and then tears us up. So I will. You know what? I'm kind of getting the same feeling that I didn't get but should have had before our road to war in Iraq, right? Where, although, I mean, in retrospect, of course, that was a dreadful disaster at the time because we were still in post 9/11 shock. It seemed like a lot of the arguments were rational. But nevertheless, it was kind of the same shoehorning of intelligence and public statements into a one particular country, as it turns out, that was largely irrelevant in the war on terror. And in this case, as Mick points out, Venezuela, I won't say the country's irrelevant, but it's certainly not the main actor as far as propagation of the drug trade, through the United States. We've talked about this. If you want to go to the origins of fentanyl, of course, you have to go to China. And if you want to go to midway points for drugs across the spectrum from fentanyl through cocaine, then you go to other countries such as Colombia and even Mexico, but not Venezuela. So it's curious, and then you have the Southcom commander resigning, and I've written about under what circumstances should you resign or refuse to obey orders, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was hoping for some kind of public statement afterwards to explain why that had happened, because I would assume that within the U.S. military there are those who don't think this is a particularly good idea, who regard other countries as posing a greater threat to U.S. national interests. The last thing I'll say is, the administration's policy during the campaign and repeated often since then is, hey, no more foreign wars, right? And I suppose they just meant no more foreign wars in the Middle East, or no more foreign wars in the defense of NATO, but nearer the homeland, it seems as though perhaps we have a case of the tail wagging the dog. Bottom line is, Venezuela is not, it's certainly not an existential of the United States, right?
Yeah, I think that, like Mick said early on, that, what's the goal here? Is it counter narcotics? Is it regime change against a dictatorship or a communist regime that we don't particularly like? What are we trying to accomplish, and what is the actual threat to the United States? But I think these questions are almost like asking too much at this point, because the foreign policy is just so incoherent, and it doesn't make any sense. And at the end of the day, I mean, I'm just going to editorialize. I mean, is it really about Venezuela, or is it about the Epstein files? What's going on here? Why are we doing this? But it is a serious military buildup that's happening down there. JSOC is doing exercises right off the coast around some of these oil platforms, and those exercises could be flipped live at any time. I'm sure that they deployed with an actual combat package and live ammunition for something like that. Something similar happened. This is kind of a bit of a segue, but in 2004, JSOC did a big training exercise in Thailand, and that was able to be flipped live to go after Al-Qaeda high value target. I believe the guy's name was Hambali. He was a pretty high level AQ guy at the time. And actually, the CIA liaison went and picked the guy up, and they got him that way. So they didn't need to do some big heroic JSOC raid. But the point is, there were like Rangers with live ammunition sitting next to the helicopters, like ready to roll for that if it was needed. And then, of course, the aircraft carrier is, depending on what argument you want to make, it's either a deterrent or it's a massive provocation. I don't know which you would think. So I have all sorts of questions of, just sanity tests. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. And if it is a case like a Noriega type effort, obviously the CIA is going to be, and we're not trying to just kill them because it's easier to kill somebody than capture them, as everybody knows on this. But if it is to capture them, to put them on trial, just like Noriega, essentially, then having JSOC do these, it's almost like conditioning type runs where they get used to seeing it. It's a training exercise, as Jack said. And then one day they know where he is and is in the best position. It looks like a training, exercise, and all of a sudden it's not, right? That's pretty risky. I mean, moving, obviously the most elite force in the world, but everybody's vulnerable, especially during the movement too, right? Maduro, he's even openly talking about how he's spreading surface to air missile systems all over the country. And so, you're going to have shit being shot at you from every direction as you come in. So it's super risky, even with the amount of firepower we have. We certainly won't want to see anything like that happen. So it's a big decision. And I think you all said, like, we haven't actually made the case to the American people of why that would be worth the risk, nor do I, unless I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the guy's indicted in the United States. Is Maduro even indicted? Why wouldn't you take those initial steps, right?
As we did in
have like some legitimacy of action toward, apprehending it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. In Just Cause, we indicted Noriega, right? And there's some parallels, I suppose, right? But the level of provocation coming from, arguably, I'm not saying Just Cause was a particularly good idea, but the level of provocation was high.
So let me correct myself. He is indicted in the United States. So, so that's important. That's an important point. He's been indicted since 2020.
So they also bumped the reward to 50 mil, which I don't know if that does anything.
So that's that's at least justification potentially for a military action to apprehend.
What's interesting to me about the whole thing is because the Maduro government signaled that they're willing to cut ties and contracts with China and Russia, and do deals with us. And you would think with this administration they'd be more open to, they see dollar signs, and that seems to be something that makes them makes them move a little bit. And since that's been floated out there, it's been said that like the U.S. has said no to that. And like I remember leading up to like Venezuela's always been bad news, and like we've always heard that China has its clause in there and Russia has its clause in there. And wouldn't it make sense to like if they decoupled with those countries and came towards the United? Right, that's what I'm saying. And we kind of said no. We said he offered everything to the United States, but he wanted to stay in power.
And maybe they hope that he just flees the country and goes to Cuba or something. Maybe that's part of the kind of like deterrence or provocation, putting this much firepower in there.
You can go play Xbox with Bashir al-Assad in Moscow.
Yeah.
Go halvesy on an eye
doctor. Have a soup tester.
They'll go partner.
Think about it. Venezuela used to be one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America, man. It has 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. It's like worth $14 trillion, I think I read. And yet they have 7 million people fleeing the country because it's a collapsed economy. Right? If you really want to see socialism in its pure form, there you go. It's not working too well. So keep that in mind. Not that we're talking politics here, but there's a reason that the country who should be doing very well and has credible, it's got more proven oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. Think about it, right? And yet its economy has essentially collapsed.
I was going to say something mean, but I'm not going to do it. Not to always. I mean, I guess Saudi Arabia is the dictators we do like. Sorry, Andy.
Whoa!
Don't say anything, Andy.
Yeah.
Don't say a word.
Keep your mouth shut. Sorry. We'll move on.
Dissociate from this.
Also, there is an argument to where you could say because of all the sanctions over the years and stuff like that, that's why they weren't allowed to be in the world economy like any other country or most other countries, is why their economy is trash. There's an argument there. I'm not saying it's total, black and white like that. Obviously, and Maduro's not a good guy. Neither was Hugo Chavez. So,
right. Yeah, it's connected, right? Like if
Sure.
they weren't in charge, then they would be.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of they probably should spend more time talking about that if that's the intent. Talking about how well Venezuela could be doing if it had a legitimately elected. Machado essentially was going to win. So he declared that she was ineligible to run. That's like the oldest, autocratic trick in the deck. And then she picked somebody to run who most international watchers of the polls believe won 70% of the vote. And then, Maduro just declared himself the victor. And that's where we are now. So he's completely illegitimate. And, I think the U.S., if it is a regime change, ought to just be really open about it. And there's a lot of reasons why that would be not only beneficial for the United States because of the flow of illegal immigrants coming from Venezuela, but also the people of Venezuela. I mean, why not just make the case? You don't need to do it covertly.
I'd be interested to see what the U.S. polls say. Surprisingly enough, Just Cause supposedly was supported by 80% of U.S. population. There was a catalyst, right? It was the killing of an off-duty Marine, but clearly the U.S. was prepared to do it beforehand. And I'm wondering.
I doubt it. I'm sorry to be a skeptic.
To agree with you, yeah. Because my point is this, that I think the appetite of the U.S. public for foreign adventures, even those on our doorstep, is pretty low. And I think I would have thought that would be a significant obstacle to a decision by not any legal obstacles, but certainly that.
I think it's pretty incredible how inoculated the American public has become to the point that they don't really see airstrikes or special operations as being war. And we've seen that with these strikes in the boats in the Caribbean and now the Pacific. There are people raising concerns about the legalities of it, of course, particularly people like in our circles. But like John Q. Public doesn't really seem particularly bothered by these types of strikes. And I think that unless you have Marines coming home in body bags, I don't think the American public's really going to raise too big an eyebrow about it. It's just something we've been conditioned to accept for decades now.
Yeah, and it's the idea, I think, to your point. We saw this for 20 years and still see it with strikes in Syria and stuff, with the military just doing what they do based on AUMF that was, decades ago, right? Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. Now we declare another group that does obviously not supportive of narco-terrorists, but they don't have anything to do with Al-Qaeda, right? So now we just declare them a foreign terrorist organization, and I think the public just says, okay, well, I guess we do the same thing against them. But there's no AUMF equivalent for military action against narco-terrorists. So I guess the question would be whether you support it or not. The system's supposed to have Congress give for continuous operations, lethal operations, give the military authority to do so. If not, then what's the authority? And I think that's the legal question. Even if all these people are smuggling drugs that are getting killed. And I would assume that the targeters are not presenting targets that aren't valid. But even if we're presuming they are, which is fine, like, doesn't the executive branch need some authority from Congress to continue this, or if not, they can just do it in perpetuity. We could strike every boat that we think is carrying drugs going north.
So a couple of points in that. I agree. I think Jack brought up the legalities, Congress's role, both in authorizing military force, the War Powers Act, all these things. I think the American public just doesn't understand. It's one thing not understanding the path that got us to where we are now with the War Powers Act, with the AUMF, but they don't understand in principle the role that Congress should be playing as a check on the executive, right? When it comes to foreign policy. And I'm not sure they even care. I think there's a lot of Americans who are just, hey, they're bad guys getting killed, and you guys are, Mick, your point's absolutely well taken. Strikes overseas, whether it's Afghanistan or whether it's against drug boats, they don't understand that there's good reasons why we adhere to these legal niceties, both domestically and internationally. I mean, they represent norms, right? And the concern, of course, we talked about it here on the show before, is if we think that lethal force is okay to exercise automatically without any kind of approval against people who are violating U.S. law overseas or intending to violate U.S. law overseas, then legally and ethically, we've opened the door for any country that wants to take out their own citizens in the United States, or anyone in the United States who is violating the laws of their country. Think about what India did and supposedly did in Canada against Sikh activists, and everyone made such a big deal of that, although no one really cares about what the Canadians, think. And of course, they're our enemy now anyway. But, my point is I think it's a serious one. It's the same thing when we talk about killing people with drones in another sovereign country without the government of that country agreeing. We are implicitly opening our doors or ourselves to other foreign powers doing the same. And the last thing I'll say is, I'm not even sure Congress understands. All right. I mean, you expect the senior chamber, the Senate, there to be greater concern. But certainly, across the board, there's some dithering around. There's some, hey, I'm not sure this is exactly right. There are discussions, but there isn't a coherent serious questioning of these acts. Another drug boat gets struck, or we think it's a drug boat. Who knows? I mean, there's no serious opposition.
Yeah, and you would think there'd be a robust debate going on in Congress.
One would hope, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's oversight committees, right, for both armed services and intel. They should be able to see the intel that they're using based the basis for the strikes, right? So they should be able to make their own assessment of whether they're accurate. And then they're supposed to have an authority under the Constitution. I mean, Article 1 is Congress. It's not the presidency. So if we're going to get away, and this isn't a political statement, if we're going to get away from Congress having any play in the use of the military in foreign conflicts, which one can say this is, then it's simply like the Unitarian executive theory or whatever. Yeah. The folks that want basically a more robust presidency. He doesn't even need to go there and talk to them. That's not how the system was set up under the Constitution. It's a balance.
That's the point that people have made in recent days about, with the government shutdown and this guy who's a private donor giving $100 and some odd million to
130 Mellon.
the administration. Yeah, is the guy Mellon, who's this like reclusive billionaire, sort of heir to an empire of railroaders, I guess. But anyway, he donates this money to keep the troops paid. As I understand it, it comes out to like $100 per troop, so it's not really paying their paychecks.
Sweet.
But nonetheless, the point being is that if the soldiers are being paid, our soldiers, American soldiers, are being paid with private funds, then do we really have a republic anymore? Is that what this is? Or have we become something else at that point?
Yeah. It gets back to, I know I'm sounding like an old fogey, but what is being taught in our schools? What is being, ironically, immigrants who have to go through the green card process and get citizenship have a better understanding of the fundamentals of, what U.S. What the institution is founded on, and the fact that one of the founding fathers' biggest fears was an untrammeled executive, right? That's why the U.S. system was supposed to be so messy, because they didn't want a king. I don't mean to go down that road again, but it intentionally. But then I think we've probably in the last, you'd have to go back to Vietnam and the 70s really to look for a serious debate right within government about the role of Congress in foreign policy. The War Powers Act arose in the aftermath of Vietnam because of Vietnam. But even then, Congress, many argued, was slow to act. And that was when all Americans had skin in the game, because we had the draft. But then we went through 20 years of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where only a tiny percentage of the U.S. population was paying the price. Congress certainly didn't provide very, for a number of reasons, didn't provide rigorous oversight of those wars. And one of the reasons may have just been aftermath of 9/11, but one reason undoubtedly was they had no reason to do so, because their constituents they didn't have skin in the game. Domestic policy was all important. What happened in Afghanistan and Iraq didn't even make the top fold of the paper. And so I think everyone kind of got used to this somnolent attitude of Congress to foreign policy. And now you have certainly a group of our population now who seem all in on just increasingly strengthening the powers of the executive. And see any attempts to restrain the powers of the executive as being close to treason. It's an extraordinary state of affairs, and I can only say that it does stem from a huge collective national lack of education about what this nation was founded on.
Yeah, I've done the citizens test with my friends who are American citizens, and
you did them for your friends, did you say?
No, I used to do a podcast, like a comedy podcast, and I thought it'd be funny to test my friends' knowledge and like U.S. history and stuff like that, and it was pretty bad. These are full-grown adult men, citizens of the United States. They had no fucking idea what was going on. So I think there's something there to that thread you just said about education.
Yeah, well, you're not far off. Your father was a first generation immigrant, right?
Yeah, he came here from Greece.
He went through all that.
So another aspect of this is the national defense strategy, which hasn't came out yet, right? There's reportedly this shifts from all traditional strategies in the past, where we focused on China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, to both the Western Hemisphere, which I think we can see playing out, and homeland defense, which has got a lot of people raising their eyebrow, because we obviously have NORTHCOM. The U.S. is going to defend its homeland, of course, but to have that as like the principle is a kind of a turn toward isolationism, right? That you're going to focus your military efforts on homeland defense. Not that that's obviously something they're going to do, but withdrawing from the world is what people are that oppose this. And this is completely counter to the first Trump administration, right? I mean, I was part of that. The national security strategy, the defense strategy, and the military strategy, it all flows from each other. But it's based on essentially the prioritization of the White House. And if the priority now is the Western Hemisphere and our homeland, that's going to be a shift from every president we've had that I can think of, at least in modern times.
Since Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, since there's a good point, since Woodrow Wilson. But this might be we're seeing the activity before we see the strategy, is I guess my point.
Yeah.
We're seeing them focus on the Western Hemisphere.
So we just going to let China eat our lunch? That's it? That's the move? That's the national defense strategy?
It's a big concern with cutting foreign assistance around the world and withdrawing. Because if the military strategy, right, so that's when the rubber hits the road, right? So national security defense strategy is just what it sounds like. It's more strategic. The military strategy then says, okay, you're saying that homeland defense is, so I don't need to have this many of our forces in the Indo-Pacific or Europe, all the other places that you've now set as a lower priority. So if it was consistent with the way strategy and implementation works, you would see a shift of forces, I guess, back to the United States or at least in Southcom.
It's interesting to see these articles that keep getting published in the Atlantic or Foreign Affairs, which I unsubscribed to actually this year because of kind of what I'm about to say. Publishing these articles about, a new Pacific strategy, a new American grand strategy, and all this sort of stuff. And it's these academics are kind of stuck in vapor lock here, and they just don't realize the current conditions and the current world and country we live in right now, that those things are relics of the past. They're dead now. Like, that's not a thing. Like this country has made it clear, I think, at this point, like, we're putting that prior strategy aside and we're going to something else. And I don't know if I want to put a name on what it is we're going to just yet, but our sort of like foreign policy experts and elites have not wrapped their mind around this fact yet at all, in my opinion.
Yes. And there's a lot in the administration who were very consistent with the old way of thinking and prioritizing. I mean, there's plenty of real China hawks in this administration. And I guess they're just being muted. Or they've decided that they're no longer China hawks.
Rubio?
Well, yeah, I mean, Rubio, at least in my experience, was a pretty traditional Republican.
Every time I see him on video, it looks like a hostage video. Like he's just, What does he do, Mick? You tell me. You were in the NSC. What does he do? I know he's a Secretary of State, supposedly, but Witkoff and Jared Kushner seem to have taken that job.
Well, I mean, I would say this. I mean, he's also the National Security Advisor, which doesn't really work. I mean, that's no slam on Rubio, but you can't really do both jobs. I mean, Secretary of State's job's outside of the country, right? The National Security Advisor is supposed to be at the White House around the president at all times, right? So it just doesn't. I know I think Kissinger did it too, but I just don't see how, as a practical way, that would work. I think Rubio, his voice is good in the sense, at least from my perspective, because he does have a long-term experience in intelligence and foreign policy in the military, at least from the legislative side. And he has a more traditional view of the world, which is not, I mean, you can look at the past statements he said about U.S. AID, for example, or why we need soft power. But, part of taking the job is you're not the one ultimately setting all the policy. So, it's something you had to decide.
Andy?
Yeah, I wonder who, well, it's a rhetoric question, but I mean, the power behind the throne, it's really interesting if you look back in the last 20, 30, actually, back to the 80s, or the 70s even. I mean, Nixon's a great example. I mean, it's very obvious to Nixon that Kissinger was the power behind the throne, right? And we talk about the guy as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Hate him or worship him, Kissinger was a personality who could do that, right? I mean, he had the gravitas, he had the knowledge, he had the ruthlessness. I mean, he knew how to orchestrate power and he knew how to make that work. But my point is that a national security advisor is a strange position, and it's unusual that Kissinger made Secretary of State in being the position it was. Where I'm heading on this, I'm not simply waffling. I'm just saying that every president, has one or two guys who are the real power behind the throne, right? And it's not position dependent. In some cases, it's the White House chief of staff. In some cases, it's national security advisor. In some cases, it's being the Secretary of Defense. In this particular administration, it could potentially be the vice president, but it's hard to divine. Nick, to your point, the fact that people who have the credentials and the background in foreign policy are not the ones with the voice, and I think that's a little bit concerning. Whether we call them China hawks or not, the guys who are China hawks at least have some track record, right, in dealing with these issues. And a lot of these people came out of, traditionally when they weren't in the administration, they were in a think tank, whether it was a Republican or Democrat. So they built up this, this collective knowledge, and you just don't see that in this administration. I think perhaps that is why, Jack, to your point, you're seeing a lot of these. I don't want to say traditional, but the concept, the perspective of foreign policy that has worked for the United States since 1946 being cast aside. And we don't know yet what is in its place. It seems right now, frankly, to be incoherent, right? Venezuela's a threat. Canada's a potential enemy. Russia's our friend. We seem to be all over the place.
To me, it seems like, reading these pieces in Foreign Affairs and so on, the way I take it is that these experts are really in mourning for the death of America's foreign policy. Like, they're going through the stages of grief. There's like denialism, there's coping mechanisms, there's all these different things. And it's like, hey guys, I need you to skip right to the end where you get to acceptance and understand what's really happening here, because time is going by, history is taking place very quickly these days.
Yeah. And I mean, think tanks traditionally, when your side isn't in office, if you will, they go back to think tanks, right? But you still want to influence the policy, and that's been cut pretty substantially. And I mean, I'm into several, but like the Defense Department, I think still they're not allowed to engage with think tanks. At least it was for a while, which is very odd because that's always been advantageous to the Defense Department to be able to talk to people who have really detailed knowledge, like spend all day worrying about, in some cases, specific sectors of foreign policy, and have that. It's kind of like CIA analysts in the sense that they live it, breathe it, travel there, and they're just incredibly knowledgeable about it. And that's a big advantage for the Defense Department. At least I know that they, in addition to the cutting the media out, they haven't been allowing active forces to have these engagements. Usually there's fellows. Like, you go to a think tank.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know if they just, I don't know. Actually, I can't even think of why they would have done that.
Because power comes from the White House down, and there's going to be no other advisors or courtiers that are going to come in and influence the decision-making process.
I mean, but it's not even like dissent, right? Like, it's just analysis on like what's going on in a specific region, right? It's not even like I'm against what you're going for. Like, that's what I don't.
Well, that would be like a mature way to think of it. By like, if you're a giant toddler, it comes across as dissent, and you get angry because you're hearing things you don't want to hear.
Just to be, who's a giant toddler?
It would be the president in this case.
Right. Yeah. And I think the real power behind the throne is sure. I honestly, I think the real power, or like a big faction of power that's in the White House, is the deputy chief of staff. I think he's pushing a pretty big agenda. Not going to lie. Stephen Miller is his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Talk about waffling and a little bit of bipolar foreign policy. So we had the meeting between Zelensky and Donald Trump at the White House last week. Before that, he had a phone call with President Putin from Russia, and tomahawks got taken off the table. It seems reports have said that meeting was not a great one between Zelensky and Donald Trump and the administration. There was shouting. There was reports of like they pushed the maps towards the table, and there was a lot of cursing from the president. And then a few days later, now there's talk about the Sanctions Act coming back to life. If you guys can explain to me, the layman, what the fuck the policy is regarding Ukraine, that would be awesome.
I guess start with the positive. The sanctions that were put on the two largest Russian oil gas companies, that's a positive. Putin came out and said it's not going to make a difference, which to me means it's going to make a difference, or he wouldn't have said it. Right? The secondary sanctions are what everybody's looking at. That's the bill you referenced in the Senate, the Sanctioning Russia Act. Has at least 85 senators signed on. That's unheard of nowadays. But apparently Thune won't push it forward until the president gives him the green light. Not sure why we're waiting on that. That we need to cut off the spigot of the funding, even to China. China buys, I think, 47% of Russian oil, crude oil. Get my facts right. So
Yeah.
That would be significant to cut off their ability to fund this. On tomahawks, yes, it takes a little while to be trained, but the best day to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best day is today, right? Why aren't we training? And the Ukrainians are smart as hell, and they've got all the motivation in the world to be able to learn this stuff. So when I know they got to configure it so you can launch it from land and all that, but they can do it. They can do it. A positive that I think the White House denied, but I think actually happened, is they have approved the use of Storm Shadow, which uses U.S. data, so we're a participant in it, to have no limits inside Russia. So that's kind of a backdoor way of doing this. But I think we're going to have to give Ukraine not only the ability to defend itself, but to win. And then they start winning if we want to see Putin actually come to a summit with any intention of a ceasefire. And then, of course, you also have the frozen Russian assets that could be being released to Ukraine so they can buy, Patriots, stuff like that. Right now, there's the other thing I'd say on that. There's a lot of chatter amongst the think tanks. It's like maybe Europe should take over the negotiation because we're just not getting very far with convincing Putin it's in his interest to have a ceasefire in this conflict.
Mick, did you say so that part confuses me about Storm Shadow, because Storm Shadow's exclusively European. It's the MBDA. It's a European consortium, defense companies that put it together.
Apparently it uses our targeting data. That's the issue that's being reported, that the U.S. has not only approved, like you can still use our targeting data and shoot at things inside, and they've reduced the authority to make these decisions to the UCOM commander, so the SecDef and his staff are no longer making the decision. He's given it to the UCOM commander, which the idea is that he's going to approve more.
So we are going to provide our intelligence for Storm Shadow hits.
Yes. That's what's being reported.
Yeah.
I think the White House denied it, but I think that's political or part of the negotiations not to acknowledge that we agreed to.
So, Storm Shadow's formidable weapon. It's like, no, I forget. It's like, I believe, it's another subsonic cruise missile, and I don't have the data to hand, but
550 kilometers.
What's that?
550 kilometers.
It's pretty short range, and it's got a bigger warhead, I believe.
450 kilos.
500 kilometers, that gets you to Moscow, doesn't it?
I think so. It's not as
400.
long as Tomahawk. The Block 2 of Tomahawk is 1,500 miles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a huge difference in range. So according to the data you just read out, much the same payload. I think the advantage with Storm Shadow is it's more accurate, and it's got, I mean, both of them have cruise missile. You can look this up deep, but cruise missile's got like in addition to GPS, it's got an infrared terrain.
INS IIR.
Yeah, so it's an infrared navigation. So in other words, it can't be jammed by and the same thing with Storm Shadow, but it's a different system. It's terrain profiling system. So they both bypass Russian EW jamming, but I believe the Storm Shadow is even more accurate than the Tomahawk. But that's not necessarily what you. I mean, the Tomahawk's accurate enough, and that range is really the significant thing. I would. I don't. That's an interesting point. I should know, but I don't know if. What was the range again? It's like 200.
It's 450 550 kilometers, so 342 miles.
Okay. I'm not sure that does reach Moscow, but I don't know.
I'm pretty sure. Hold on. Keep talking. I'll try to do some math here.
That's going to look it up. But the key issue is the Russian refineries, right? That's what the Ukrainians are going after now with considerable success. And they've, depending on who you read or what media outlet, even the most conservative are saying that they've slowed Russian oil final production, by a third. Some go as high as almost a half. So that's significant. And given the Tomahawk, they could certainly do greater damage. And they can go after the Shahed factories and wherever they are, Kyrgyzstan and all these other things.
Yeah, there's a massive one in Russia that's like out there. It's probably 1,000 miles in.
So yes, it definitely gets you to Moscow.
I have a question. Like, Storm Shadow is made by a European company, conglomerate. All right, and the Ukrainians have been using the U.S. intelligence since the beginning of the war, even before it. So I don't know what the holdup would be. Like, you can't use our intelligence that we're already giving you to use a European weapon to shoot into military and oil refinery targets in Russia. Like, I don't know why that's a stop. Like, why do we need to okay that? It's just, we've been okaying them to do covert stuff. Like,
well, to me, we should have said right from the beginning when we knew they were going to invade that if they invaded, that we're going to prove everything that they needed to win. Right. Yeah. Then we keep doing this where we publicly debate whether we should give the F-16s or the Abrams or the HIMARS, and then we wring our hands and clutch the pearls and all that stuff. And then it gives Putin a chance to say what we're always going to say is, well, it's complete escalation or we're going to nuke it. We should just approve these things. And I know it's easier said than done without the debate. Public debate, at least.
It's interesting. Yeah. It's, a lot of my friends, would probably make the argument. I know they have made the argument that this is the same criticism they have about the Vietnam War, that it was like this seesaw effect. There'd be a pause in fighting because of the Paris peace negotiations, and it would just kind of go back and forth forever. We're doing that in Ukraine right now. It's like, why do we keep doing this little drips and drabs, little baby steps, getting towards something? I realize there's like this escalation matrix that you have to think about a little bit, but so many of those norms, so many of those fears we had have now been destroyed. I mean, we've seen all kinds of things that were unimaginable previously, and it seems that unless we have like NATO troops storming towards Moscow, Putin's not going to use nuclear weapons. So to your point, Mick, I agree. Like, just give them everything they need to win the war. Like, let's stop dragging this thing out.
We're either supporting Ukraine or we're not, and we've never understood that. We are providing lethal aid. That is the red line decision, right? It's not the range of weapon systems or the number of range weapon systems, and we've drip fed weapons and allowed Russia to adapt, as they have done, and they've done pretty well. I mean, HIMARS was effective for about 2 or 3 months, and then the Russians learned how to jam it.
And we let Putin run this psyops on us that, like, he pretends he's negotiating for peace, and we humor it. That's not what he's doing. Come on. He's just biding for
not
time.
at all.
Exactly.
Same thing with the TACMs. I mean, we gave the Ukrainians 12 HIMARS. You know, we didn't. I mean, we didn't even give them enough for. I mean, barely enough for one per division, and the Russians easily learned how to counter that. Same thing with the TACMs. I don't think we've really ever. I mean, two things to Jack's point, we've never understood Putin, and secondly, we don't understand the dynamics of providing military aid. That the countries adapt in war very, very quickly, and Russia's always been strong at electronic warfare. They have massive systems every 10 kilometers along the line. The Ukrainians are losing. I mean, you can look this up. Look up how many drones the Ukrainians are losing per month. And I think you'll see it's something astounding. It's in the thousands, right? Just at EW. It's the methods of warfare there are beyond anything that our own defense industry can adapt to in a hurry.
Estimated monthly loss is 10,000 drones per month.
10,000 drones a month. 10,000 to EW. You know what I mean? And yet they keep churning them out. Can you imagine if that was being done to us? You know, we've got like a handful of MQ1s, MQ9s at $30 million a piece. We'd lose those right off the bat in the first couple of hours. That's what I mean by the fact that we're all prepared. We don't have the ability to generate 10,000 drones a month. I guarantee you that.
What's interesting about that is you see so many, like in the startup space, there's so many drone companies that are popping up, like for particularly for the US.
And the difference is in Ukraine, they're all tied into the industrial defense establishment. High tech and defense are together. And the Ukrainians, I think we talked about this on the show, but they've just developed a unmanned tank because armored vehicles are proving to be they're proving to be a liability. Okay. And tanks was, armored personnel carriers, infantry, fighting vehicles. No one uses those things anymore. There are, they
see the Russians on dirt bikes and
absolute death traps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every single Bradley that we provided to the Ukrainians has been blown away. What are they using? They're using motorcycles, and they're using, and foot mobile infantry, well dispersed to do infiltration. And so what the Ukrainians have done, because as much as I laugh at Marine tankers, and I still think they're absurd in their opposition to us getting rid of them. I know I don't. It's like, I don't want to open myself up to that. But the point is, you still need a rolling gun platform, direct fire capability, reaching out to 2 to 3 clicks, or even 4 in case, whatever sort of terrain you're in. Whether you're fighting in mount or you're fighting in open terrain, that is an incredibly useful weapon to have. The problem is that once you put human beings inside, it becomes larger, slower, less maneuverable, and more vulnerable. Well, the Ukrainians now have an unmanned tank that uses. You can look it up. I forget what it's called, but it uses AI.
The sauce?
AI. It uses AI for target acquisition, and my point with that is you don't even need an operator with a narrower field of view. You've got obviously there's some disadvantages with using AI for target acquisition in a tank, but the point is they've developed it, and I guarantee you within a few months they're going to mass produce these things.
Probably at a decent price too.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they are essentially expendable. They don't have human beings inside.
Most of the expense for tanks is based on trying to protect the humans inside, right?
Yeah.
That's why they're so heavy and so expensive.
If you can have hundreds of these things on the battlefield, can you imagine? hundreds of these things rolling in on you, being able to target human beings automatically, covered by drones.
Yeah, it's called the Phantom UGV. To our cyber overlords. That's what it's called. By the way, are you polite when you talk to Chat GPT? I am. You know they're gonna take over one day, right?
I'm relatively polite until it starts fucking around, and I get kind of upset with it. And I'm like, you gotta look at this before you fucking send me it. I'll drop an F-bomb in there. And he's like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's the same thing I tell you, D. When you send me stuff, you use AI to generate.
Yeah. Well, listen, D talks dirty to Siri, so I think you're asking the wrong guy.
Sorry, I missed that. I don't know what you guys were saying. Better off, probably. All right. Also, a bit of news. There was an agreement between Sweden and Saab and Ukraine to sell Ukraine 100 to 150 Saab Gripen E's, which is a fourth plus generation fighter, which is probably perfect for Ukraine too, because like they're able to like land and take off on like a fucking highway and stuff like that. I feel like that's probably apps for what they need. So Europe is stepping up for sure, I think, right? So. And this is definitely not a cheap package. I think it's like 150 million a unit per plane, but that's with like the weapons and stuff like that. So
they've been talking about that for a while. I'm glad to see that it's finally gone through.
Anything else? I mean, we could touch on Gaza and like the precarious situation there. The peace is still kind of, I guess, holding a little bit, even though Israel seems to be bombing the shit out of Gaza still. I mean, we could touch on that.
I mean, with the trip of Vice President Vance, I think it's pretty clear that the U.S. wants to see the entirety of the 20-point plan happen. While he was there, the Knesset voted on annexing part of the West Bank, and you saw his pretty direct reaction. And then President Trump basically saying the U.S. would cut off all support to Israel if they did that. I mean, I don't know if you get any more direct than that. So the ceasefire is holding. You're going to see skirmishes because that's just going to happen. The aid's coming in, which is great. Obviously, my group spends a lot of time on that. And well, the biggest issue is Hamas disarming, right? They're going to have an issue disarming because they're very vulnerable, even though in the plan it gives them sanctuary and potentially safe passage. I don't know the country that would take, 5,000 Hamas people. And then this international stabilization force, which Secretary Rubio said recently, I think, and during his visit, is being established. Right. So I haven't seen really.
Who's the bulk of that? Indonesia?
Well, Indonesia volunteered, Egypt, Turkey, but Turkey's a big issue for Israel. Israel said they don't want Turkey in there. The U.S. came back and said tough. So, I mean, it's clear that the U.S. is being a little tougher on Israel than in the past. So whether it'll have an effect or a long-term effect, we'll have to see. But the big issue is, what are we going to do with Hamas collectively? Are they going to be allowed to stay in Gaza? Are they going to be confined to a certain Hamas section? Are they going to be forcibly disarmed, which means to me just combat? So that the long pole in the tent is the disarming and demilitarization of Hamas.
Anybody? Boys? Andy? Jack?
Yeah, I mean, I not most of what I'm about to say, I've said before in some shape or form. The bottom line is, and I always preface this discussion with this comment, that at least it's an agreement. At least it's something that was hard to imagine 3 months ago, but the devil is in the details, and there are so many details that are potentially problematic. And Mick just hit on a couple of them, along with the nature of the security force and the government itself, who's going to administer Gaza, while the Palestinian Authority supposedly meets certain criteria that enable it to do so, and is the PA even capable of doing that? And then you've got some interesting dynamics among the neighboring Arab countries, or just countries in the region. Mick commented about Turkey and Turkey being the Turkish contribution to the Gaza security force being something that the Israelis oppose. But, the Arab government and the Egyptians, I think, are probably the only potential donor of security forces that are credible right now, as far as a country that has agreed to do that. Easier to deploy. Egypt has a history in Gaza. In fact, Egypt owned Gaza until 1967. They weren't particularly popular occupiers there either, but more popular than the Israelis. And of course, there's a cultural affiliation. But that's not. But Hamas still is going to remain a problem. I mean, the Egyptian government has no love of Hamas. In fact, that's one of Sisi's biggest concerns. Is that during all of this, that Hamas was going to get increasing support within Egypt. All of which is to say, yeah, it's great that the killing has stopped for now. Most of the killing has stopped for now. It's great that some aid is getting in and that there is at least, and the U.S. has its weight behind a peace plan. But there's no more clarity on the details. Well, 1 month ago, and time is ticking.
All right, so we'll keep track of this. Jack, what do you got?
Not much. That's about it.
Okay. I want you guys to do me a favor before we go. Check out Mick's new podcast, Pub on the Porch, The Applied Stoicism. Link is in the description. It's a great pod. Andy Milburn's got a great book, When the Tempest Gathers. Link is in the description as well. Jack Murphy's wrote a plethora of books. Some would say he's writing too many books. No, I'm joking. He's got a great book, We Defy the Secret History of Special Forces Special Forces. That link will be in the description. High Side, his outlet with Sean Naylor, the guy who wrote the book on JSOC, where they do deep dive investigative stuff. They have some crazy shit cooking up. I can't mention, and I won't mention publicly. It's awesome. Check that out. The High Side Substack. It's down in the description as well. And where can you support the show? I'll tell you where. Great question. Patreon.com/The Team House. You get both Team House and Eyes On episodes ad-free early, and you help support the show. We can keep doing this. Guys, as always, it's a pleasure. Do you guys have anything else you want to say? You want to plug something else?
Yeah, I want to plug a suggestion that the Team House have an off-site party this year, maybe in Dubai.
Is that in the budget, Jack?
Yeah, I think
we're gonna fly everyone out there.
Yeah. Well, Andy's kind of close, so he'll be cheap to get there.
You only need you guys out there. I mean, a lot of people can attend remotely. Mick and I will attend in person.
We'll take that under advisement.
Yeah. All
right, guys. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Great discussion.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's D. I want to thank you for watching the show. I really appreciate it. And I'd love for you guys to check out our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/The Team House. The link is in the description. Super easy to find. If you're listening, it's in the show notes as well. You can find it right there. What do you get? You get ad-free audio, ad-free video for both Eyes On Geopolitics and the Team House podcast. So 2 podcasts ad-free for the price of 1. You also get the shows a couple days early on both video and audio. And you have the opportunity to shoot us a message, ask questions, whether it's Team House or Eyes On. We could cover topics and stuff like that. It really, really helps support the show. We really appreciate the patrons that are there now. We couldn't do it without you guys. So consider supporting the show. It's at patreon.com/The Team House. The link is in the description and in the show notes if you're listening to us on audio. Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.